All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's best practice series on blower doors and testing methods. It will kind of focus on the DM32, but we're going to talk about a variety of other gauges today and what we consider some of the most common best practices, and we look for your input. Colin, do you want to introduce what we're going to do today and talk about some of the overview and what's going on with our new webpage?
It's about blower doors, and one of the things I've asked Joe to do, who's a trainer who works for us, is to follow along a little bit on our quick guides. The quick guides that come with our blower doors, and there's also a quick guide that comes with our gauges, are all pictures. They're very easy to use, and in most cases that's all you need. And with every system that we sell, we include a very stiff hard copy of that quick guide, which hopefully will last you for a few years, and it's essentially all that you really need to run your equipment. So I've asked Joe to parallel some of his conversations today with the quick guide so that would walk you through, and the way it's laid out is with a series of boxes so you can check them off step by step. Joe's presentation is going to be much more interesting than a quick guide, I can guarantee you. I will be standing by in the background here, ready to answer any questions that you have. One of the questions that we're going to ask you is what you would like to get out of this webinar. By all means, don't be shy about letting us know what you need to know, and we'll make sure that you get that information one way or another. So I'm going to hand it back to Joe, and he told me this morning he's come down with a flu, and being the trooper that he is, he's going to forge on regardless. So I may have to take over for a few minutes here and there. So he's probably not up to his usual self, but still you can stand by and be prepared for an interesting presentation, I'm sure. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Colin. The image I have up on the screen is the new RetroTech website. Some of you have been to many of our webinars, and some of this information is familiar to you. Others, this may be your first time checking back in with RetroTech. But I highly encourage you to go to RetroTech.com, check out the site. You can actually do it right now, probably while you're listening to the webinar. And they've really revamped this to make it incredibly user-friendly, and they're not done. So they're constantly trying to make more improvements. Right there in the main screen in the front is actually where the upcoming webinars are, and you can schedule, register yourself to go to the next webinars. All of the software is all easily accessible right from the home page, and you can learn a lot about the DM32, the virtual gauge software, how to control the min-ups fans. All this stuff is right there on the home page with great graphics and a nice layout to actually bring it into the modern era in terms of what you're looking for on a website. So there are quick, simple links to actually guide you through that. I'm still trying to develop what this actually is, because the best practice is really kind of for everybody. I've been to many of a lecture series where I paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars, but I left with like one tip or one thing that may have been beneficial. And so this is for beginners and for experts alike. There are some general questions that may be very generic or simple, and we also try and cover some advanced concepts. I can tell you that this is actually this webinar we're going to do 3 times really during the year. So today is really the first go, and I really am looking for some feedback from everybody as to what are some of their best practices. And I look forward to adding that with your actual reference or your credit in the next time we do it. And by the end of the year, this will actually be a great document that somebody could watch in less than an hour online and actually learn a lot about what all the people are that are listening as to what are some of their best practices. It's not a how-to guide. I don't really need anybody's war stories. We all have those. But we're really after, like, what are the tweaks or the things you've learned to make your system or your practice a whole lot better. This is not a complete how-to. I'm not going to go through how to actually set up the blower door or how to push buttons or anything like that. It's kind of a general overview. I'm assuming that most people that are listening are very familiar with the blower door concepts, that you've already had a class or have some familiarity with the blower door and how it works. From whatever gauge you have or whatever system, there isn't really like a generic, let me teach you how this works. There's some a basic understanding has to come with the presentation. it's not, I do cover some code stuff, but it's not a specific code or third party, but the IECC is something I was trying to touch base on. So I want to know, what are your requirements? That you saw a flash of the 2009, which does not have a blower door requirement unless you live in Georgia. I happen to live in Georgia, and they were pretty forthcoming in terms of requiring blower door and duct testing when they passed their 2009 code. Some areas accepted it, other areas fought like they do now. But the people that are going to the new 2012 IECC code, not only does it have very stringent requirements for duct testing, but it now also has requirements for blower door, which for a lot of municipalities, a lot of contractors, a lot of building officials, this actually is now a new challenge. I do training for building officials and municipalities and contractors. If anybody's looking for that, send your information through the questions, and we can make sure we put you on our list as we travel. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back. So the requirements are 5 air changes per hour in climate zones 1 and 2, which are mostly southern U.S. and the very tip of Florida. 3 air changes per hour in climate zones 3 through 8, which is kind of the majority of the U.S. And if you do not have a basement, 3 air changes per hour is a difficult number to achieve. Air changes per hour is based upon a volume of air. So if you have more volume in the house, example, a nice big basement, your volume gets to be very large, and thus it's a lot easier to pass 3 air changes per hour. So homes that are slab on grade have a much more challenge to comply with the 3 air changes. It's not impossible, but it is kind of a quick learning curve for a lot of builders or municipalities. I'm curious, because I did not make this a poll question, but I would like to get some feedback, especially the building officials or anybody that does this. According to your municipality or authority having jurisdiction, what is an approved third party? What is that? How's that defined? Is it just you got to know the building official, or are they looking for BPI or ResNet? What kind of requirements does that actually take into effect? If anybody here is BPI certified, which many of you are, and or HERS raters, if you look at the guidelines for BPI or the ResNet, they are a short novel, or definitely a short story for sure, multiple pages on how to do a blower door. These are the only requirements that the IECC gives you about how to test. Basically, it's 50 pascals, but these are the things you must do or not do. So I think they have some a little more cleaning up to do in terms of some of the criteria that they really should do. But for right now, it's a very open-ended test. Most everything is closed, but just not sealed, unless you have a ventilation system or any kind of fresh air. That's the only thing that's allowed to be sealed. So I am curious, and if you have not, I encourage you to do so, is when's the last time you actually inspected your fan, like looked at it? A lot of people would just get it out, throw it up, put it in, and you may not even seen the backside of your fan for quite a while, depending on how you store it or use it. But there are very sensitive sensors in there that you definitely want to make sure are not dirty or clogged. And I will go through some best practice in terms of how to confirm that your gauge and or your fan are checked correctly. These are some excerpts from the quick guides that Colin was mentioning. I'm sorry, Colin, I did not have an overview of the quick guide. I made one, and I think it got deleted at the last second. On the back page, they actually give you instructions about how to check your gauge weekly and how to do that. And I encourage you to document it either with pictures or some kind of a journal. All right, so I do have some pictures about what this is when you do your field check. Basically, I'm going to just take the gauge, and I want to compare channel A on one of the ports, either input or reference, to one of the ports on channel B, input or reference. So it's actually 4 individual tests, and we highly encourage you to use the actual umbilical or tubing that you're going to use on the test. It doesn't help to have a special piece of tubing to check your gauge if you're not going to actually check the tubing you're going to use in your test itself. When I teach this live, I warn people that beware, I'm going to explain something that will require you to do something regularly to help reduce your liability. Once you've been exposed to something, you could be required to then follow suit. I think this is just one of the greatest peace of mind you can do, that check your gauge, document it, and know that no matter what, I am actually able to confirm that it was working correctly and I had no issues. So the illustration that I have here shows the ports on the DM32, right? And basically I'm going to go from one side over here, channel A to channel B, and I'm basically going to go port to port. So up here I have the yellow tubing, right, going from A to B, and then I did the same thing. So I just went from outside to inside, and then I switched the tubing that I used for the blower door and went out to in and in to out. Whatever method you use, I encourage you to just come up with your same methodology or habit, the same way you may set up a frame, and just do it each time. Notice the numbers. Right? The yellow tube is a much shorter tubing. Maybe it's only 8 feet long or something. The red is probably closer to maybe 15 feet or even longer. That the shorter the tubing, the higher the numbers if you look at the numbers that show up. What we're seeing on the actual illustrations is here is channel A, right? And I also have channel B. And what they're showing me is what happens when I actually push the tubing down. It creates pressures, and then the gauge will balance itself. It does its self-check, and you can watch the numbers slightly rise, and then they'll slowly fall. So usually you're around this range for most of the shorter tubing, and the longer tubing you're actually going to end up with numbers at around 100 or even less. Colin, you want to talk about the range that we're trying to look for, or what could be a suspicious or a concern?
Well, generally they either read pretty much the same within a percent of each other, so these gauges be accurate within a percent, or 0.2, 0.3 pascals, that kind of thing. So all these are well within a percent. So at 215 pascals, obviously percent is 2 pascals, so these are reading almost exactly the same. So when the gauge goes off, it usually goes off a whole bunch. Like one might read 50, the other might read 250 or so. So that would indicate that there's something wrong with the transducer, which is actually pretty rare. What's more common, which is extremely common actually, is the fact there's a problem with the tubes. The tubes might be blocked at some point. So if you get a reading that's out on the gauge, try a different tube, and that way you can differentiate between a problem with the gauge and a problem with the tube. The number of times that we've had people send equipment back over the last 30-some years because they thought it was an equipment problem is almost zero, and it's almost always something that you can uncover in the field, really.
So here is the information that's on the back of one of the quick guides that Colin talks about. And I love their quick guides because they're very visual, they're easy to read, easy to understand. They have little check boxes about what to do next. So as you're first learning, these are a great tool because they actually provide step-by-step instructions on how to do it. So this one is a very specific one, so I'm going to modify it slightly, and I'll show you the one that I did in my house. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to find a room, any small room, maybe it's a closet, maybe it's a bathroom, and seal any known openings. So if it has a fan or a register or anything that's, you know, obviously an area that should be sealed up, you're going to seal those. You're going to test with the results set to EQLA, which is equivalent leakage area in square inches. And you can set either of the RetroTech gauges up to do that as a preset, and that'll be either in your channel, that'll be in your channel B. And you can do 50 pascals, you can do 25. It depends on how big that room might be. And what's going to happen is you're going to get results. So I test the room with my little, I made a little plywood, it could be cardboard, but I have a fixed opening that I've cut out. So I know that my opening that I cut is 12 by 12, it's 144 square inches. And I have my blower door set up just below it. So when I test this little room, I know that it's going to have the leakage of this opening that I made at the top. And it also includes any leakage that's in that room that's just inherent underneath the baseboards or wherever the room leaks on areas I really can't see. I mean, every room has its own leakage is the bottom line. So what I have here is the first results, which were 168 square inches, which includes the opening that I've already established as my little board that I made, and the leakage in the room. And then what I do is you actually cover the opening that you actually made, and you'll test again to the same pressure and same settings. And now the only thing I'm going to have is actually what's the leakage of the room or the small area. So if I tested it with my opening that I made, my little cardboard or plywood opening, as 168 square inches, I covered it and it went down to 24 square inches, then I know that the room in general, you know, between the blower door and the room and all the little nuances, would just always leak 24 square inches. And if I subtract one from the other, I'm hoping to get near the actually pre-designed opening that I had. Maybe it's, it should be plus or minus 10%. So this is one way that you can, you know, set this up in your house. I made a little board out of plywood. You can use cardboard, anything that just to stay in place, and I kind of taped it so I tried to reduce as much of the natural leakage as I could, and you could actually confirm your fan was working correctly.
Joe, I just wanted to chime in there for a second. And
yeah, sure.
If people are more interested in CFM or CFM50 or whatever, they can very easily change EQLA to CFM or CFM at 50 on their gauge by, you know, simply changing units. So you can put the gauge on hold and go and change the units, and you can see EQLA get changed to CFM50 if you prefer those particular units. So you can either do it on the gauge or do it on virtual gauge, which is a free download that will work for anybody, including people that have, say, Minneapolis gauges or any other make of gauges. You can actually use the virtual gauge as a really cool way of changing units by simply putting in the channel A, channel B pressure, and you can go in there, click on channel A to hold the display, to freeze the display, then go and change the units, and you can see how different units compare.
This is one I'm hoping where I get some people to kind of give me some feedback. I'm not going to go through the blower door checklist as to all things you're supposed to do or turn off. Like I said earlier, I thought that most of the listeners would kind of be past that, but we're looking for the details or the things that that are you know, commonly forgotten, or you found, oh, you know what, we learned this was a great way to actually do this. One of which was also that you know, where does the tubing go that's out front of the house, right? There's a whole barrage of information about that or how to do that. One thing that I can tell you, which my picture didn't work out, is how to not, I repeat that, do not put your tubing inside of a bottle. Many people are like, oh, you put it in a bottle, it will block the wind. The reality is if you put it in a bottle, the wind that will blow across the bottle will actually create a negative pressure itself. So there are numerous options to do that, but I just want to make sure it was clear that you do want to make sure you pick a smart location. Hopefully you're not testing into the wind already. And one of the other ones is, do you fully evaluate, before you do your blower door test, the crawl space? And I'll be the first to admit that I usually do the crawl space kind of as the end, or unless there's an issue immediately, I usually don't go in there so quickly because it's messy, or fully evaluate the attic or a duct system. And when you go around to check the windows, are you confirming that they're locked? Because a lot of people go down and they're like, oh yeah, it's closed, but do you actually go over and touch the window and confirm that it's locked, including older homes that have the upper casement that may have actually slipped down and the doors are locked. I had actually a call to go out and check an air infiltration issue at a home, only to find out that they had awning tile windows and they never locked them. And they actually were in a windward area and kept getting dust throughout their house. And the bottom line was they just weren't locking their windows. And the other places are you actually checking out the garage and what kind of issues. The point is about when we don't actually do a full building walkthrough, when we don't actually evaluate the crawl space or see if the makeup air for the hot water tank that's in the kitchen comes from the crawl space, which is full of water or other yucky stuff, or the attic, which had water damage and has mold growing all over one section, or duct systems that have massive separations, they may not even be using it anymore. That when we miss these things, we actually could potentially cause issues if we do a blower door. So before you do a blower door test, are all these things really well evaluated? Because most of us depressurize a house, and I'm trying to do a study to find out what actually, or the potential risks that we may bring into a house. And most people will say, oh, it just gets ventilated. But a lot of those things actually don't get well ventilated. They do fall throughout the house, and there's also determined as to what is a suspect condition and when do you decide to pressurize a house. So this is probably a whole 3-hour topic, which it will be at the ResNet conference, but I want to make sure people were very aware of when they're doing what, and please don't hesitate to give me some feedback as to your opinions about these, or things you might have found, or challenges. If I go to do a IAQ assessment, and I have a variety of people that are not just hypersensitive, maybe even risks, maybe depressurizing isn't always the solution. So there is criteria about how to do pressurization, but most of the time you're actually just doing I fixed it, so I can actually pressurize, correct some air leakage, and pressurize again to know that my numbers went down. So you don't actually have to have always an exact criteria to meet when I'm working on existing homes. I add this slide because it's a slide that I used to do when I do for a course actually for building officials and a variety of contractors. Because I think if you can, when you're dealing with the blower door tests, that there's a variety of criteria that you can be testing to or use. Most of us use the volume of the structure or the area that we're testing. Some actually now use the surface area that includes the ceiling and the floor and all the walls, and that actually helps determine, how much leakage you have per surface area. All of the RetroTech gauges will also tell you, which I showed earlier, is the EQLA, which is the equivalent leakage area. So while I'm doing the test and I can do CFM, I can also just switch over and determine and tell my clients, here's how big of a hole you kind of have in your house right now. Some people use the 10% rule, but in general, the gauge also helps you with that. And there's other criteria that California uses, which is a whole surface leakage area per square foot. There's a variety of criteria that are now coming into play. The air changes per hour is also based upon your ventilation needs. So when I try and explain, these different criteria and different challenges, I try and remind contractors and building officials that there's a variety of stuff that you think of as your envelope, including your air handler and duct system. Wherever the air barrier is separated or penetrated, that actually becomes the other side of how you actually separate. So there's a variety of areas that now really become part of your envelope that we always thought of as really maybe the duct system or just small openings, but those actually, as we all know, can turn out to be a huge volume of leakage from areas that are either receptacles or below the plumbing in the bathrooms or kitchens. So all these things are actually now become part of really where the air barrier is. One of the things we're doing is best practice, and my goal is to try and really bring up what's happening in our industry. And many of us have been in it for 4, 5, 10, 20, 30 years for people that I work with. I wish I was in it for 30 years, to be honest, but a lot of stuff has had incremental changes, like, oh yeah, oh that's interesting, oh you can do that now. The reality is, as of last year, and what will really be included is the 2014 new testing options, are what you can do with the manometer, what you can do with your smartphone and tablet and your PC, because these are going to revolutionize not just how we control the fan, but how we document what we're doing out there. So most of us, I chose not to over bombard us with polls, but I'm curious as to how do you document your results from the day. I've always taken pictures of my manometer before I left, so I had peace of mind that I know that the range was set correctly and everything was good. I encourage building officials to ask for a picture of the fan and a picture of the manometer. But in general, if you could share some of your, how you guys document your results, just for yourself or for, you know, either your code official or other people that may be requiring that, whether it's your provider or QA. So one of the things that's out now, you can go to the RetroTech.com and you can download this software. It's called Virtual Gauge, and it will allow you, it looks just like the gauge itself. It runs on your PC. I can help you now. It does not run on a Mac, so it's not Mac available, but it will work on Mac if you have parallels, to answer that question. So, but I can actually connect my PC to my gauge, either USB or Ethernet or what everything is now, which is Wi-Fi, and literally control the gauge itself. Right? I see my pictures don't match up, something got changed there, but the reality is that I don't need to learn any strange software. What I download on my PC works exactly the same way as the gauge. You can also download this right now, anybody who wants to go try it if you're on a PC, and you actually can play with it without having it connected to a gauge or to a fan. At the bottom, it actually has a start gauge simulator, and it will do everything that the gauge will do. You can change devices, change the range, change the results. The entire software is actually right there for you to play with. So as a learning tool, it's a phenomenal way for students to come to the classroom. I've already all played with the gauge themselves. So there is a PC application that you can download and work on a regular Windows. It works on Windows 8 also for PC. And they also have a Android and Apple iOS applications for your iPhone or for your Android devices. Android devices also include the Amazon tablet and other similar tablets. They all run on the Android operating system. If you're looking to find it, it's called Gauge Remote, and usually you can find it at the Apple Store, the Google Play Store fairly easy. There is no space between Gauge and Remote. If you're going to the Apple Store, make sure you're on the iPhone search and not the iPad search, because they actually now have two separate searches. Even though it should show up on both, it's Apple, it does not. But if you go to the iPhone section of the store, you should be able to find Gauge Remote. You can also type in RetroTech. It usually also shows up. And what I do and many others is just go to the website of RetroTech, and it gives you a link to go there directly. So no matter what device you have, for the most part, it will run on those. Some older Android devices are a little funky, but in general, anything that's just a couple years old, you can actually control your fan and control your gauge, which controls the fan, remotely throughout most of the house. It's a huge freedom that we've all been wanting to do for quite a while. Here's one of the ways that it actually will come into play with people that are doing blower door testing, whether you're going to use the mobile device or you're going to use the actual PC itself, is that now I can actually take my PC, I set up the blower door, let me back up, I set up the blower door with the gauge by the front door, the same way you normally would set it up, nothing has changed. All the tubing is all still connected right there at the fan, at the door. And then I'm able to open up my PC and actually control the gauge from the kitchen or from anywhere else in the house. That's much more convenient. So once I have my gauge running on my PC with the virtual gauge application, the other thing I can also now do is actually share my results with anybody anywhere. So I can now use my Wi-Fi connection. I need an internet connection to share that, but otherwise I just needed a Wi-Fi connection. And now I can actually share my results with a code official, builder, my provider, anybody who wants to see. So if you're a provider and you have new trainees, it's one way to confirm what their test results are. I can literally see their gauge live. And you can also hand control of the screen over to somebody else, and they can actually control your screen, which means they also control the gauge. It's a great little fun feature. Between sharing your screen or documenting your results is one of the things that I think is going to be the greatest change that 2014 will bring to the industry. That for the first time, you're going to be able to actually confirm without any hesitation. And I'll be honest, I don't feel like our industry needs to have some checks and balance or we're cheating the system. But when I talk to building officials, when I talk to other people in the industry or resident providers, that it just takes one guy or one person to cause other people to have problems. So the reality is that we all want to document our own work, so this makes it a lot easier, and it makes it easy to share our results. This is also an app you can download for free at the RetroTech website. It's a data logger, and you can hook it up to the DM32 Wi-Fi, or you can hook it up to, many of you who are here today have the older DM2 style, and you can hook it up to your PC with a USB and do the same thing I'll talk about here. So I can hit start logging. I can determine what the interval is it's 1 second or 30 seconds or maybe a minute. How often will it capture the settings from my gauge as I'm testing? And it'll also just kind of show me the results as it goes. So if I set the interval to 1 second, I start logging, I'm done with my test, I hit stop, and it brings up a very simple Excel spreadsheet that anybody can open and anybody can read. Of course, it's hard to read now. Let me zoom in on it for you. Starting on the left in column A, it tells me what kind of gauge is it. And I actually ran 2 gauges, so I had a DM32 and a DM2. And about every second, it was grabbing the data from both gauges. It tells me the serial numbers. It tells me what device they were running. Oops. So I was running the Minneapolis, which I'll do here in a few minutes, with the DM32. And the DM2 is running the RetroTech 1000. It tells me the range and also the pressures that they had from channel A and B and the actual results that I had the gauge set up to, so I can actually see what are either CFM or air changes per hour, whatever those were. And it gives me a timestamp. So this is something I can send to people or just keep as a document for myself. I set mine up when it saves, it actually saves in a folder that goes to Dropbox. Or it could be SugarSync or Google Drive or Box. It may not work with iCloud, but in general, you can actually save it to a cloud service and share those results. And one of the things that makes this kind of more interesting is that if any of that document's changed, all these providers kind of let you know that there's been changes to that document. So it's one way to justify that this is the original document, those are my results from the test. Colin, you want to talk about some options about what's available for folks today, and we'll move past that.
Sure, I can touch on this briefly. We're currently continuing to sell our old DM2 gauge. The DM32 is the option that we're providing with most of the systems that we're selling right now. But if you want to save a few dollars, you can go back to the old DM32, which DM2, which I still think is probably one of the best gauges out there. And by using the setup customization features, you can make it extremely simple to use. The next option is getting the DM32 Wi-Fi, which is a little bit more expensive than the DM32, and I think it's around about 300 or so increase for the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is all built in. You don't need any attachments or anything like that. So if you would like to get prices on that, just send us an email to sales@retrotech.com, which includes a lot of things that people have asked for in questions here, and we'll be happy to provide you with information on pricing with the gauges, upgrades, or complete systems that have those gauges. We also sell the DM32 with attachments that will run the Minneapolis blower doors at the same price that we sell the gauges to RetroTech users, and we don't charge them anything for the adapters, which will adapt the signal from our gauge that will speak the language that the Minneapolis blower door speaks, so that we can make that all work seamlessly. And a number of people out there have that. One fellow asked about, he has the DM32 running an Energy Conservatory fan and wants to get manuals all the manuals that we have, which is probably about 500 pages of manuals in total, will work with, will make sense with the Energy Conservatory equipment. We've also made some of the features on the DM32 make running the Minneapolis blower door a little bit easier. For example, if you're pressurizing, you don't have to attach the clear tube to channel B, which is one of the requirements. It's all automatically taken care of inside the gauge. So I'll hand it back to you, Joe. I hope that answers your question.
I went a little over. I apologize. It's for best practice. There's like so many things you want to put in, and it's hard to get them all in. But I do want to, on behalf of RetroTech, thank you. So the first part is completed, all right, which was kind of a best practice. I'm going to hand it back over to Colin here in a second, and he's going to talk about answer some questions, and I'm going to set up for the next part, which is literally how to actually run a Minneapolis. I'm going to set up a video camera and show you that right now.
So it looks like we're seeing a video feed from Joe with a Minneapolis blower door set up in his house. Looks like it might be set up in one of the RetroTech house simulators, which is a small kind of tent. Yeah, it is a house simulator, I can see. It's a small tent with aluminum frame behind it so that you can run the fan into a very, very small space. Ideal for, oh, there's Joe himself. What do you know? He's real. And he's turning the simulator around so we can see that, yes, it is in fact a simulator. And on the sides and at the back are sliders that enable you to add as much as 16 square inches of leakage in either location. We can't quite see down that far, but I think we kind of get the idea. So there's a slider that allows you to add as much as 16 square inches of leakage at the bottom, two sides, and at the back. So that's a total of 16 times 3. What's that, 48 square inches of holes?
Colin, should I take over?
Sure, absolutely.
So what I want to try and do is a live demo. A little under the weather this morning, so I got behind. I appreciate your patience. So what we're trying to do is show you that the DM32, whether it's Wi-Fi or non-Wi-Fi, either one, they both interface the same way, will actually control and provide all of the functionality that the DM32 provides, and you can actually use it on the Minneapolis fans. My camera wouldn't allow me to get far enough way back to see the whole thing without you seeing my entire living room, but the reality is that I actually have the Minneapolis version 3 on the bottom here, and I'm going to go. I already have it set up. I'm going to go show you how it actually works together. I'm going to have to like walk in there. So the glare is a little off, but this is the shoe that would have held the original DG700. You can see that the new DM2, the new DM32 is smaller, about the same thickness, but definitely much smaller than the other one. It does come with a quick guide, which I'll bring up in a second, and they provide you with a new set of tubing, because we actually have our own, RetroTech has our own color coding. You can use your original tubing that comes with your DG700, but the color coding that RetroTech has chosen is slightly different. The tubing that's on the ends of the Energy Conservatory is a little different, and it doesn't really work well with the RetroTech, and the ends get kind of flared from how the DG700 goes on and off its ports. Right. So once I have the new DM32, I no longer need this gauge itself. But I do need the speed control that comes with your system. Most of the blower doors that have been made for the last 5 or 6 years came with a speed controller that actually was able to allow the cruise control for the Minneapolis system. So RetroTech developed a dongle or an adapter that will convert the signal from the DM32 to adapt to the speed control signal that the actual one uses for the Energy Conservatory. So if you buy the DM32 and you explain that you have, or if you're a trainer that you might have, people with Minneapolis fans, then you can actually get this for free. It's not an upgrade or anything extra. It's just included if it's something that you need. So I'm going to bring up the virtual gauge so you can see the screen a lot easier. Virtual gauge is the PC software that I mentioned a second ago that you can download from a RetroTech website. And I can make the screen a little bigger so we can see what's happening. The star settings feature is here, and I can actually open and close the drawer. And I have the gauge that's here in the video on the right-hand side is connected to my PC through Wi-Fi. So under here, I can actually tell it to connect through a network, define gauges, and there's the gauge that's sitting right there. I'll double-click on it, and now it's connected. I'll close the little settings feature, and I'll even try to make this a little bigger and wider. There's a bad glare on the screen. There you go. All right, so I can now control the gauge directly from touching it itself. It's all touchscreen. Or I can use the PC to actually control the gauge. So as I change the settings here, like right now I have it set for the Minneapolis fan. And let's say I change the range. I touch the screen, and you can see on the screen of what the display is on my PC, it automatically changed. So if I want to go to the A range, I now have the A range. Or actually pick C. There's the A range. All right. I can also select different devices if I wanted to. These are all of the Energy Conservatory Minneapolis fans. My next screen takes me to a feature that the gauge has about hole size and how to determine flow. And then there's the RetroTech fans themselves. So this is their duct tester, and that's the 1000 fan. And if you look at the actual small, subtle color coding on it, it determines how many tubes it has, tubing, or whether it has an additional power supply. So if I was going to use the RetroTech system, again, I take my range. I'm going to change the device and go back to where I was. So I'm back to all Minneapolis. So all I do is actually select the fan I want. I'm actually on the B range. And now it's all set. Right? Just to make sure we're clear here that this is actually, I just have some Velcro on the back. I had it USB plugged in just so I can keep it charged. It kept the last settings. I unplugged it and it reset. So I actually have the last settings that I just had. But basically it just sits where the old manometer would have sat. They give you some extra Velcro. Actually, you can Velcro this on yourself to the speed controller. So it just sits there. And once you use this all the time, you probably just leave them together. They give you a short Ethernet cable to use the speed control. And they give you an additional audio cable in case you don't have yours from the original system. So these are all things you get, including a whole set of tubing. Just as you would have used the speed control on with the Minneapolis gauge, DG700, it has to be on slightly. And I can just touch the screen. I can do the set pressure. I'm going to do just because RetroTech does not actually have a dial that I have to control, and I can also set it to any pressure. I'm going to just set it to 10 Pascal just to make it not so loud. Right? My PC lost its connection when I unplugged it. So you can see on the display on the screen that you see in front of you the gauge itself ramping up. And if you can see clearly, you can see the actual gauge itself, and they're pretty well synced. So now that I'm using the smart gauge, I now can use some of the smarter features that are available for the RetroTech system. For instance, right now with CFM, most of us live or use CFM all the time, but if I was doing a blower door and I wanted to do air changes per hour, I can now calculate air changes per hour directly in the gauge while I'm testing. The air changes per hour is based upon a volume, which is under settings. So I go to volume, and I kept my last settings, which was 15,000 cubic feet. So let's say I have a larger house and it's 22,000 cubic feet. And at the bottom, it also tells me what my volume is set to in case I forgot to realize if I've set it or not. The setting on the virtual gauge isn't the same as what's on the actual gauge. This has an update that shows me your volume is set to 22,000 cubic feet. So now my air changes went down because the house is larger, and now I can actually see the results live. You can do EQLA, you can do a variety of stuff that we talked about just by hitting the results on channel B. I go to the next side, I go EQLA in square inches, I go back, and now it's telling me at 10 pascals, which I'm operating my test pressure at, I have about 113 equivalent leakage area. All right, I'm going to hit stop. I'll turn down the speed controller. Just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to undo the shoe here, and you can see that what I actually have is a short cable that connects to the adapter. I have a speed control audio jack. It looks like a 3.55 millimeter jack that connects from the speed control to the adapter. And then I have my DM32. Colin, is there any kind of specials that are happening at all?
We did have one in North America. I'm not sure if we have one going on in Europe right now, but I would say if you're interested in an upgrade, by all means, just send us an email to sales@retrotech.com, and we'll see what we can put together. So here we are trying to use most of the existing Minneapolis hardware, including their speed control. We build all of our speed controls into our fans, so we don't have a speed control with cables and stuff. And both of them work, just a little bit different. Joe, I'm going to have to, I unfortunately have a dentist appointment in about 10 minutes, so I'm going to have to take off. Do you need someone on this end to help you out, or are you just about done?
No, we're wrapping up right now. So I'm going to do one more simple test, but instead of actually touching the gauge itself, I'll see if I can get that to show up clearer. Yeah, it's a well-worn Minneapolis system here. Oh, hey, there we go. Okay, good. So instead of actually touching the gauge, I'm going to go to the PC, and you can see my mouse hopefully on your screen also. And I'm going to change the results on channel B here back to CFM, just for simplicity. I'll go back, and now I'm going to do set pressure, 1, 0, set, and now I'm actually controlling the fan itself. Let's turn on the speed control. Controlling the fan itself from my PC. It does have jog buttons here. You can see in the green I can go up and down 5 pascals at a time, either on the PC or on the gauge itself. And I'll give an upturn to adjust the screen. Yeah, there is a nice quick guide that goes along with that, with the system. I thought I could bring it up. Simply it did not want to come up that fast. And so since we have a pause here, I will give you a quick story then Ken about the fireplace. So it was about 2 years ago, so I thought, oh, I used to, I was renting, so I thought I would retest my house. And of course we kind of get lazy about some of these things, and best practices get put aside. And so I'm doing the blower door test, and I turn around in the living room, which the living room was probably only like 25 feet from the front door, and there is a huge funnel-type row of ashes across my living room carpet. And it's a rental property, only to realize that my flue has been open for quite a while. When my wife was doing, thermal logs or something that you'd have in the fireplace, and I didn't think twice about it. We get complacent sometimes, and it caught me. So it can happen at any time. Luckily, it was in the summer, so it was not hot ashes, but it definitely was something I had to clean up. Yeah, we try to do it in the beginning, but sometimes it's not always clear. That is that I actually do not work directly for RetroTech. I just do training and beta testing for them, and it allows me to provide, my direct experiences with you, or always encouraging me to just speak my mind, which helps a lot to do what I do in my position. So if you have any other questions about how it works, I think it is a phenomenal gauge as a gauge itself. I've always been excited about all the things that it did with the software that was inside of it, from air changes per hour, which for me was the reason I bought my first RetroTech system, to also this is the great support that they have. For those of you that are still hanging on, part of my relationship with RetroTech was that I would send Cullen emails, or the sales department, or anybody that would grab them. And the majority of them all go to Cullen. And if you've actually done this, you'll know that he actually responds to your emails individually, for the most part. If you actually have something worth adding to, then they don't hesitate to actually adopt your corrections or ideas. So if you have something that you think is valuable to the testing system, whether it's blower door, duct testing, or all the new things you're testing on house and fans, don't hesitate to send them an email. Throw it in the questions here. Everything is read and reviewed. So most of their changes and their constant upgrading literally comes from folks like yourself and myself providing good feedback. One of the things we're going to try and develop is more software that is integrated to your iPhone, iPad, Android, mobile devices, phone, and tablets. So if there are features that go beyond the gauge itself, like literally controlling the gauge is pretty straightforward, we're there. I'm interested to see what are the things you're looking for that you can do. Some of the things that we're trying to dream up is how to capture the data from the gauge and what to do with that. And we can't do temperature yet, but we're hoping someday to conquer that. But try and get as much stuff as you can from direct sources, from geotagging to documenting all the things that are in the gauge or in your device, and how to incorporate that into something you can share, transmit, and create a report. So if you have any suggestions or comments about how to make that process smoother for your process, your memberships, BPI, ResNet, or code compliance, or anything else, please don't hesitate to chime in. I do not have CE certificates for this webinar. When it's only a single brand, single manufacturer, it's hard to get anybody to give you CE credits for that. So we are working on it, guy, and it just hasn't happened yet. But that's our goal, is to conquer that and try and make the webinars go beyond what RetroTech actually sells to make it more universal. You can do what's considered self-reporting. BPI takes some of those, and I know the IECC takes many of them that you can put down that you were here, and if you need an email from somebody, send us a response or send us an email, and we can reply to make sure you have the documentation. I think somebody asked about the Infotech fans. To my knowledge, it does not. There were only so many things that they could adapt to, but it does not actually control those fans. And of course, there was a slide saying it controls everything, but I think that the high percentage of actually Minneapolis has a majority of the fans that are out there, and so our goal was to actually have Coke and Pepsi in the same room. Someone asked, is there any economical output from the gauge? No, but there are a variety of other software programs you can use on your tablet or smartphone, of course PC, like RED, Residential Energy, perhaps the other part, it's no important yet, has some great programs that can actually do infiltration estimates for your location. It's one of the things that's out there. I appreciate everybody for hanging around. Don't hesitate to ask RetroTech for my email if you want to talk to me or contact me directly. Everybody have a great day. I look forward to seeing you soon. We'll have webinars at least